Miles Griffin Harlow clenched his jaw as he hurried through the jet bridge onto the plane. He was angry, no, fuming. This was not how the day was supposed to go. As a billionaire used to private jets and smooth itineraries, Griffin found himself in the last place he ever expected. Coach class on a commercial flight out of New York. Worse, it was bound for Atlanta in the middle of a storm delay. His expensive leather loafers tapped impatiently on the airplane aisle as he inched along behind slow-moving passengers. He muttered under his breath, eyes narrowing. A crying infant somewhere ahead added to his irritation. Great, he thought. Crying babies. Could this flight get any worse? Griffin ran a hand through his ash-blonde hair in frustration. It had been 2 years since his divorce, 2 years of burying himself in work, and today's string of bad luck felt like the universe mocking him. Finally reaching row 23, the seat number on his crumpled boarding pass, he halted. A young mother occupied the window seat, struggling to calm a fussy baby in her arms. In the middle seat, a second infant dozed in an airline-approved car seat that the mother must have secured for the flight. Airlines allow only one lap infant per adult, so she had wisely purchased a seat for one twin. Griffin's irritation softened to mild sympathy at the sight of the overwhelmed mother juggling 2 little ones traveling alone with twins. She's brave, he mused internally. He cleared his throat. Excuse me, he said tersely, indicating that the aisle seat, his seat, was beside her. The woman looked up, one baby still wailing on her shoulder. Sorry, she murmured, shifting to let him by. In the cramped space, Griffin maneuvered carefully around the diaper bag at his feet, and the tiny legs kicking in the air. As he settled into the aisle seat, he caught a glimpse of the mother's face for the first time. A flash of recognition hit him like a bolt of lightning. He knew those eyes. Even before his mind fully processed it, his heart began to hammer. The woman beside him, this exhausted mother with warm brown skin and deep dark eyes full of stress, was Zora. Zora Aaliyah Harlow, his ex-wife. Griffin's breath caught. It felt as if the noisy cabin fell silent for a second. The crying baby in her arms, the second baby in the seat next to her, the chaotic boarding, everything around him blurred. All he could focus on was Zora's face, equally stunned, staring back at him. For a moment neither spoke. 2 years of painful silence between them seemed to crystallize in this one unbelievable coincidence. Griffin, Zora whispered finally, her voice almost lost under the baby's cries and the whoosh of the cabin air. Her lips parted in shock. She blinked rapidly, clearly processing that the man who had just taken the seat beside her was Griffin Harlow, the very man she had hoped never to run into like this. Before we continue, take a second and join this family by hitting the like button. If you enjoy stories filled with raw emotion, twists, and real lessons, subscribe now. You help this channel reach more people when you stay with us. So, thank you for being here. Griffin opened his mouth, but no sound came. His throat was dry. He simply nodded, confirming his identity, as if she could ever forget. Zora, he thought after all this time. He hadn't seen her since the day the divorce was finalized. Now here she was inches away holding an infant, 2 infants. His eyes darted to the babies. Twin babies, a boy and a girl, if the pink socks on one and blue blanket on the other were any indication. He felt a jolt in his chest, emotions swirling, confusion, disbelief, a strange surge of could it be hope, but then a wave of hurt and anger washed that away. She had moved on, apparently. She has children, twin babies. Griffin swallowed hard, struggling to compose himself. Zora adjusted the baby in her arms, a tiny girl with soft curls, trying to soothe her. Griffin noticed Zora's hands trembling slightly. She was just as shaken by this encounter as he was. I didn't expect. She stammered softly. Neither had he. Griffin finally found his voice low and strained. Zora, it's been a long time. The words felt inadequate, but what else could he say? How do you greet the woman who disappeared from your life, taking your heart with her, and who now apparently has a family of her own? A blend of emotional drama and light romance swirled around them in that cramped row of the airplane, unseen by the other passengers. The flight crew continued ushering people to seats, oblivious to the silent drama unfolding in row 23. Zora's eyes flickered with a mix of emotions. Surprise, apprehension, and something like sadness. Yes, it has. She managed a polite, if shaky, smile. The crying twin fussed against her shoulder, so she bounced the baby gently, patting her back. Griffin tore his gaze from Zora's face to glance at the squirming child. Big brown eyes, tiny fists gripping Zora's blouse. The baby was about a year old, maybe a bit more. Twins. The other infant, a boy, slept soundly in the car seat, oblivious to the tension. Griffin's mind raced. If these were Zora's children, could they possibly be? No. He cut off the thought. That was impossible, wasn't it? He realized he was staring and forced himself to speak, keeping his tone neutral. They're beautiful, he said quietly, nodding toward the babies, a formal, distant compliment. Yet his voice softened despite himself. He couldn't help it. The tiny girl had Zora's button nose and the boy's little face as he slept. Looked oddly familiar in a way Griffin couldn't yet place. A hint of a grateful smile touched Zora's lips. Thank you. She adjusted the pink pacifier in the baby girl's mouth. And finally, blessedly, the crying began to subside. The infant relaxed against her mother, hiccuping softly. In the relative calm, Zora dared to meet Griffin's eyes again. This is quite a surprise, she said, almost a nervous laugh in her voice. Griffin let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. You can say that again. He ran a hand over his face, still trying to register that this encounter was real. Of all the flights, of all the seats. He noticed Zora eyeing his outfit. He still wore his tailored charcoal suit from a meeting that morning, though the tie was loosened and the jacket now slightly rumpled. Perhaps she was as astonished to see him flying coach as he was to be there. I'm on my way to Atlanta for business, he explained preemptively, answering the unspoken question. Last-minute trip. My jet was unavailable, so I had to catch a commercial flight. Zora nodded, a few curls escaping the loose bun atop her head. I see. She hesitated, then added softly. I'm heading home to Atlanta. Home. So she lived in Atlanta now. Griffin's chest tightened. Atlanta had been just another city to him 2 years ago, a place for board meetings and investor conferences. But now the word Atlanta took on new meaning. It was Zora's home. She's been there this whole time. Before he could ask anything else, the pilot's voice crackled over the intercom, announcing an impending departure and instructing passengers to take their seats and fasten seat belts. Griffin quickly buckled in. Zora shifted to buckle her own belt, careful not to jostle the now sleepy baby girl in her arms. Griffin noticed Zora struggling to manage the seat belt with one hand while holding the child. Without a word, he reached over gently. Here, let me help. Their fingers brushed as he took the belt and clicked it into place for her. A spark of contact, the first time he'd touched her in years, sent an involuntary shiver through both of them. Zora murmured, thanks, and looked away, her cheeks flushed with a warmth that wasn't just from the exertion of wrangling the babies. Griffin swallowed, his own heart skipping at the brief touch. Even now, the chemistry between them hadn't faded. It lingered in the charged air like static before a storm. As the plane taxied out and prepared for takeoff, an awkward silence settled. Griffin's mind churned with questions he didn't know how to ask. Zora seemed equally tense, focused on her children. The flight attendants did their final checks. The lights dimmed. Griffin's gaze drifted to the window where Zora stared out at the rain streaking. Across the glass, her profile illuminated softly by the cabin lights. She looked tired, probably from caring for 2 infants alone. There was a delicate beauty to her fatigue. If anything, motherhood had added a new depth to her features. In that moment, as the engines roared and the plane sped down the runway, Griffin felt the strangest shift in his anger. He had boarded this plane, consumed by frustration at trivial inconveniences, delays, seating mix-ups, crying strangers' babies. Now, none of that seemed to matter. Zora was here. The only woman he'd ever truly loved, the woman he let slip away, was within arm's reach, and she had twins. 1,000 thoughts fought for supremacy in Griffin's head. Whose children are they? Did she remarry? Why didn't I know? He realized with a start that in all the time since their divorce, he had deliberately avoided news of Zora. It was too painful. He'd thrown himself into expanding his tech empire, traveling, anything to forget the emptiness at home. He'd heard through a mutual acquaintance that Zora moved away, but he never pursued details. Now he silently cursed himself. How could he have been so cowardly if he had known she was in Atlanta? If he had known she had children? Griffin's hands tightened on his armrests as the force of takeoff pressed them back in their seats. The little girl fussed again at the sudden motion, and Zora rocked her gently, humming under her breath. Griffin remembered that tune, a familiar lullaby, his throat constricted. How many nights had Zora's soft humming lulled him to sleep in better times when she used to stroke his hair after a grueling day? It hit him then how much he missed simple moments like that, and how utterly alone he'd been since her. The plane leveled off, engines dulling to a steady hum. Passengers began to relax. A flight attendant walked by and discreetly handed Zora an extra pillow. Seeing her with the baby and offered a kind smile, Zora thanked her. Griffin glanced over. The baby girl had finally fallen asleep against Zora's chest, tiny lips sucking softly on the pacifier. On the other side, the baby boy slept soundly in the car seat. Oblivious to everything, Griffin mustered the courage to break the silence. He kept his voice low. Do you need any help? He offered, nodding at the infant carrier and bags around Zora's feet. He wasn't sure what he could do in the confines of an airplane, but it felt wrong not to ask. Zora turned to him, surprise in her eyes at the gentle question. Griffin Harlow was not known for nurturing patients. He was a man of boardrooms and big decisions, yet here he was, offering help with diaper bags and babies. She managed a small, genuine smile. I think we're okay for now, she replied softly. Then she added with a hint of warmth. Thank you, though. Griffin nodded. An awkward beat passed. Both had so much they wanted to say, yet neither knew where to begin. 2 years apart had erected a wall of unspoken words between them, as tall as the distance they'd kept. It was easier to focus on the present practicalities than the painful past. So, Griffin gestured lightly to the sleeping boy. He's a good sleeper, huh? Zora's face lit tenderly as she looked at her son. Usually yes, his sister. She chuckled quietly, careful not to wake the girl. She's the louder one, always letting us know her opinion. Griffin found himself smiling a little. That soft laugh of Zora's was like a balm to his heart, stirring memories. What are their names? He asked, almost in a whisper. Zora hesitated, and for a second he feared she wouldn't answer, but at last she said, This is Amara. She nodded toward the baby girl, and that is Dorian, indicating the boy in the carrier. Her voice caressed the names with a mother's love, and Dorian. Griffin repeated under his breath. Unique names, beautiful and powerful. He let them roll silently in his mind. He noticed she hadn't offered their last name. Harlow, or did she give them her maiden name? The question burned unspoken. They're lovely, he said sincerely. An ache spread in his chest as he regarded the tiny, fragile beings. If things had gone differently, he might have been holding his own son or daughter by now. But he and Zora never. They didn't get that far. Or so he thought. A flight attendant came by with a courteous smile and asked if they needed anything. Griffin realized he hadn't even removed his jacket. Zora asked for a cup of water. Griffin requested a whiskey, then quickly changed it to water as well, deciding. Alcohol might not help his raw emotions at 30,000 feet. The attendant nodded and left. Zora glanced at him curiously. You can lend your whiskey. You never used to refuse a good scotch, she said, attempting lightness. It was true. Griffin had a taste for aged single malt, especially when stressed. He shrugged one shoulder. It's a short flight, he lied. In truth, it was nearly 2 hours to Atlanta, but he suddenly wanted a clear head. And I need to be sharp for my meeting later. Zora gave a polite nod. Silence fell again, heavier this time with all the unsaid questions hanging in the air. Griffin's mind wandered to the past, unable to help himself. How had it come to this? 2 people who once shared everything now reduced to small talk like strangers. He remembered the last time he saw Zora's face before today. It was etched with heartbreak and tears. Without thinking, Griffin sighed aloud. Zora heard it. She looked at him with concern. Are you all right? She asked. The simple kindness in her question nearly unraveled him. After all he'd put her through, she still could care enough to ask if he was all right. Griffin nodded quickly. I'm fine. Just thinking, he managed a tight smile. His gray eyes met her brown ones earnestly for a moment. It's good to see you, Zora, he said softly. And he meant it. Despite the shock and confusion, he realized deep down he was glad fate had forced their paths to cross again. Zora's eyes softened, a hint of the old warmth shining through. It's good to see you too, Griffin, she replied quietly. There was sincerity there and nostalgia. I just didn't expect, she trailed off, unsure how to finish that sentence. Didn't expect to ever see you again. Didn't expect to see you on a plane of all places. The ambiguity hung between them. Before either could attempt another sentence, the plane gave a sudden lurch. A rumble of turbulence rippled through the cabin. Passengers murmured nervously. Zora instinctively clutched Amara tighter, eyes wide. Griffin's arm moved on its own accord, bracing protectively in front of Zora, and the baby as the plane shook. The seatbelt lights flashed on, and the captain's calm voice instructed everyone to remain seated. It's okay, Griffin said softly. Zora nodded, blowing out a breath to stay calm for the children. The turbulence jostled Dorian awake, and he began to whine. Oh, It's okay, sweetheart. Zora caputed, reaching over to pat the baby boy strapped in the middle seat. But with Amara in her arms, it was hard to reach him. Griffin unbuckled his belt despite the warning chime. "Here, let me," he said, already lifting Dorian carefully from the carrier. He drew the little boy into his own arms with surprising ease, supporting the tiny head as one should. Zora watched in astonishment as Griffin, who once upon a time borked Dad, even holding a friend's newborn, nestled Dorian against his broad chest. The baby fussed a moment, then calmed as Griffin gently bounced him. "There, buddy. You're okay," Griffin murmured, an unfamiliar tenderness in his tone. He rocked the baby almost instinctively. Perhaps it was the years of boardroom negotiations that gave him a steady, confident air. Even the infant seemed to sense comfort in his hold. Zora's heart twisted at the sight. Griffin holding a baby that way. It was both beautiful and heartbreaking. Stirring emotions she thought she buried. He would have made an amazing father. If only things had been different. Zora steadied her voice. "Thank you," she said, and the gratitude she felt was deeper than just for calming Dorian. Griffin offering help, showing care. These were things she had once longed to see from him when it mattered most. Griffin didn't look up. His eyes were on the baby boy in his arms. Dorian's tiny hand had clutched onto Griffin's dress shirt collar, and the little fingers gripping him made something in Griffin's chest swell and ache. "It's no trouble," he murmured. The turbulence passed, but Griffin remained there holding Dorian, even as the seat belt signs stayed lit. Part of him didn't want to let go. The flight eventually smoothed out. After a few minutes, Dorian drifted back to sleep against Griffin, a small line of drool soaking into the Billionaire's Italian cotton shirt. Griffin chuckled softly when he noticed, shaking his head but smiling. Zora bit her lip watching them, suppressing a laugh of her own. "Sorry about your shirt," she whispered. He looked up and met her eyes, and they both quietly laughed under their breath. It felt natural, familiar, like a fragment of their old camaraderie shining through the cracks of time. "It's just a shirt," he whispered back. "Doesn't matter." And he realized he meant it. For once, the expensive fabric he usually freaked over was the least of his concerns. In that exchange of smiles, something warmed between them. It was subtle yet powerful, a hint of light romance, a glimmer of the understanding they used to share. Griffin carefully handed the sleeping Dorian back to Zora. Once the skies were calm, their hands brushed again during the transfer. This time, neither pulled away too quickly. Zora placed the boy back into the secured carrier and tucked his blanket lovingly around him. Amara was already asleep in Zora's arms, and Zora gently laid her in her lap with support. Both babies now slumbered innocently, unaware of the storm of emotions in the adults beside them. Griffin realized his arm was still partly around Zora from helping with the baby. He withdrew it slowly, feeling the loss of her warmth immediately. He wanted to keep talking to ask so many things. But with the babies asleep, Zora leaned her head back against the headrest, fatigue evident. She closed her eyes for a moment, breathing deeply. Griffin gazed at her profile in the dim light. She was as stunning as ever, perhaps even more so now. There was a new maturity, a maternal strength in her, but also shadows of exhaustion. As Zora rested her eyes, Griffin's thoughts drifted. He remembered the last time he had seen her face so tired. 2 years ago, the night everything fell apart. 2 years earlier, Atlanta, the memory came unbidden, sweeping Griffin back to a rainy night in Atlanta. At that time, Atlanta had been their home, their city. Zora and Griffin had moved there after their fairy tale wedding, choosing Atlanta for its vibrant culture and growing business scene. And to put distance between Griffin and his meddling family in New York, they had a beautiful house in an upscale Buckhead neighborhood, and by all appearances, a picture-perfect life. Griffin recalled Zora standing in the doorway of their modern mansion, her silhouette outlined by lightning flashes outside. She had tears in her eyes. "I can't do this anymore, Griffin." Her voice had cracked that night. "You're never here. We're married, but I feel so alone." He had just returned from yet another week-long business trip, exhausted and irritable. His startup-turned-corporation was on the verge of a major IPO, and he was under immense pressure. Instead of greeting her with a hug, he had brushed past her that evening, muttering about an investor call he needed to make. That was the final straw for Zora. Emotional drama had exploded between them. They argued in the foyer as thunder roared outside. Zora accused him of choosing work over their marriage time and again. Griffin, defensive and stressed, snapped that he was doing it for us, for our future. "Our future?" Zora had cried, anguish in her eyes. "What future, Griffin? We don't even talk anymore. You're never around to even think about starting a family." She halted, voice breaking. I wanted us to have a life, maybe children, but you can't even be present for dinner, let alone that. Griffin remembered the stab of those words. The idea of children had always made him nervous. He wasn't sure he'd be a good father given his own childhood. His parents were cold, and love in the Harlow household was always conditional. He'd wanted to wait to establish his empire first, but he never clearly communicated that, and certainly not in that heated moment. Instead, he'd said something he regretted instantly. I'm not ready for kids, Zora. Maybe I'll never be. I thought you understood that. His tone had been harsh, ringing in the marble foyer. Zora's face crumpled. No, you don't understand. I never needed you to be a billionaire, Griffin. I needed you to be here. I needed you to be my husband. I would trade all of this, she had gestured around the luxurious home through her tears, just to have you truly present and wanting a family with me. The power had flickered with the storm outside. Griffin's frustration boiled over. He felt accused, cornered, so he lashed out. You knew what my goals were when you married me, he had shouted instantly, hating himself for it. Don't act like you didn't enjoy this lifestyle. Or did you think the money just fell from the sky? I have to work hard to give you all this. The moment the words left his mouth, he saw Zora flinch as if slapped. Her eyes widened with hurt. All this, she whispered. I never asked for all this, Griffin. I asked for you. The man I fell in love with would have never said something so cruel. He had stepped toward her, regretting it, trying to reach for her hand. But she pulled away. There was a resolve in her face he'd never seen before through the tears. I may have married a billionaire, she said softly, but I sure as hell didn't marry a heartless CEO. I married the man who brought me flowers from a street vendor on our first date, who danced with me in the kitchen, who said he wanted to make me the happiest woman in the world. Her voice shook. Where is that man, Griffin? Because the one standing in front of me is a stranger. Griffin had no answer. He stood there, guilt and pride wearing inside him. He was working to make her happy, wasn't he? To secure their future. But somewhere along the line, he had lost sight of what she truly needed, and maybe his own fears had driven him to stay at arm's length. The fight escalated with thunderous emotions. Zora finally declared through sobs that she couldn't stay in the marriage if nothing changed. Griffin, hurt and too proud to beg, said maybe they should take a break if that's what she wanted. He recalled the flash of pain in her eyes at that. Perhaps she had hoped he would fight for her, for them. Instead, in his stubborn anger, he let her go. That night, Zora left. She packed a suitcase while Griffin brooded in his office, downing a glass of scotch and punching the wall in frustration at himself. By the time he went after her to apologize, it was too late. Her car was gone into the stormy night. They officially divorced a few months later. It was a quiet legal procedure. Zora refused any spousal support or settlement beyond taking what was hers. Griffin had tried to be generous, but she wouldn't have it. Her pride was strong. She made it on her own as she always had. The last he knew, she moved to a new city to start fresh. And now he realized that city was Atlanta. Surprise upon surprise, Griffin now understood the depth of his mistakes. He had let his pride and work drive away the love of his life. And the cruel irony, he became even more successful after the divorce, but it meant nothing. He'd come home to an empty house and microwave dinners. No laughter, no warm hugs, just cold success. He had tried dating casually since, but no one measured up to Zora's vibrancy, her genuine heart. Griffin remained technically single, with tabloids occasionally linking him to models or heirs, but no current partner truly held his interest. He was lonely at the top. Zora, meanwhile, had clearly built a new life, one that included 2 little lives. Griffin's stomach clenched as he considered the obvious. After leaving him, she must have met someone, fallen in love, or at least into a relationship, and had children, twins no less. That thought stirred a bitter jealousy and profound regret. He should have been the father of her children. That had once been his dream, too, buried deep under his fears. If only I could have a second chance, he lamented silently. But seeing those babies made it clear he might be too late. She had a family now. He blinked away the old memory, returning to the present. Griffin opened his eyes. Zora was looking at him curiously. Perhaps he had sighed or murmured something in his reverie. Outside the window, dusk was gathering. The plane was beginning its descent. The captain announced they'd be landing in Atlanta shortly. Zora offered a tentative smile. You were 1,000,000 miles away, she said softly. Thinking about work, Griffin shook his head, choosing honesty in that moment. No, thinking about the past, actually. His gray eyes searched hers, trying to gauge her feelings. About us, Zora's lips parted in surprise at his candor. She didn't avert her gaze this time. I think about the past too sometimes, she admitted, voice barely above a whisper. There was a heaviness there. So many unsaid things. He glanced at the twins, both still sleeping like little angels through the descent. They're about a year old, he ventured gently, his heart pounding as he broached the topic of her children. Zora looked down at her babies, her expression softening. 15 months, she said, stroking Amara's tiny arm absently. 15 months, Griffin did quick math in his head. That would mean they were born roughly a year and a half after the divorce. Perhaps a year after she left, so she must have conceived them about 2 years ago. A strange flicker of hope and confusion ignited in him. 2 years ago, shortly after their separation, his pulse quickened. He asked the next question carefully, trying to keep his voice neutral. Is their father in the picture? Zora tensed slightly. She heard the subtle tremor in his question. For a moment, she didn't answer. Then she drew a breath. No, it's just me and them. Griffin realized he'd been gripping the armrest, so hard his knuckles were white. He released it, exhaling. No father, just her. That answer by itself didn't confirm anything specific, but it raised more questions. If she hadn't remarried or had a partner who stuck around, what did that mean? Had the father abandoned her? The thought made Griffin bristle protectively, surprising himself. How could any man leave Zora, especially with children? He felt a surge of anger at the unknown man, and at the same time, a flare of protectiveness towards Zora and the twins. But also, was it possible there was no other man at all? Before he could formulate another question, the flight attendants came to help Zora prepare for landing, collecting the pillow and making sure the car seat was secure. Griffin assisted by picking up a rattle that fell into the aisle. Their earlier conversation paused, heavy with implications. Zora's mind was racing perhaps even faster than Griffin's. His subtle inquiries told her he was trying to piece together the puzzle. She knew this moment would come if she ever saw him again. Does he suspect? She wondered. Zora had dreaded and hoped for this day in equal measure. The day he might learn the truth about Amara and Dorian. As the plane touched down with a bump onto Atlanta's runway, both Zora and Griffin felt their stomachs lurch. Partly from the landing, mostly from nerves. The neon lights of Hartsfield-Jackson International Airport striated. A light sprinkle of rain from earlier had left the tarmac glistening under the floodlights. We're home, Zora whispered to her babies, more to center herself than anything. Atlanta was home now, and despite the surprise of seeing Griffin, she was glad to be back on familiar ground. Griffin remained quiet, lost in thought, until the plane reached the gate. As the fastened seatbelt sign dinged off, chaos of deplaning began. Passengers stood to grab overhead luggage. A line forming in the aisle. Zora stayed seated, knowing wrangling 2 infants and bags would take extra time. Griffin likewise remained seated beside her rather than jostle into the impatient queue. He offered a small smile. No rush, I suppose. I'm not going anywhere without my carry-on, which is way back there in the bin. It was an excuse. Truthfully, his carry-on was just above, but he didn't want to leave Zora's side just yet. Not until they finished this conversation, and not until he made sure she got off the plane. All right, she saw through his polite fib and gave a tiny nod of appreciation. As people in front of them slowly filed out, Zora began gathering her things. She packed away the half-empty formula bottle and burp cloth into the diaper bag. Griffin helped by holding the bag open. Then he unlatched the infant carrier's base from the seat belt. Soon it was just them in their row as the crowds moved forward. Griffin stood and retrieved his sleek black carry-on from above. He also pulled down a folded stroller that was stowed in the overhead, likely Zora's. He recognized it as one of those collapsible twin strollers. With practiced hands, he clicked it open in the aisle. Zora looked up at him in mild surprise. You don't have to. He shook his head. I want to. He managed a tiny smirk. It's been a while since I assembled anything myself, he said, referring to how he usually had staff for tasks now. But I think I got it. The stroller clicked into place. Zora shifted Amara, who was stirring awake, onto her shoulder. Griffin carefully lifted Dorian out of the carrier. The little boy fussed at being woken, but Griffin's gentle rocking calmed him. He placed Dorian into one side of the stroller. Securing the strap, Zora placed a now fully awake Amara into the other seat and buckled her in. The twins looked around with big, curious eyes, taking in the new environment now that the plane was nearly empty. When Zora reached for the diaper bag, Griffin smoothly took it. I've got it, he insisted, slinging it over his shoulder along with his own bag. Zora opened her mouth to protest, then closed it, relenting with a grateful exhale. Handling 2 babies solo on a flight was tough. She would accept the help for now. As they finally exited the plane, one behind the other with the stroller between them, the flight attendants bid them polite goodbyes. Stepping into the jet bridge, Griffin felt the Atlanta humidity even in the corridor. It was early evening in June, and the southern air was warm and heavy, a stark contrast to the cool plane. Zora paused to adjust a tiny sun hat on Amara's head to keep the airport lights from her eyes. "Thank you, Griffin," she said softly, "for helping." He caught her gaze, offering a reassuring smile. "It's nothing, really." Then, after a beat, he added, I'm glad I was here." The double meaning wasn't lost on either of them. Zora's eyes flashed with an emotion he couldn't quite read, something between gratitude and lingering heartbreak. She nodded and started pushing the stroller up the jet bridge. Griffin walked alongside, one hand lightly on the stroller as well, as if it were the most natural thing in the world to do this together. The bustle of Hartsfield-Jackson Airport enveloped them as they emerged from the gate. Announcements echoed overhead, and travelers hurried past in every direction. For a moment, Griffin and Zora moved together in an island of their own calm amid the crowd. Two X's side by side accompanied by twin cherubs blinking at the bright world. They made their way to baggage claim. Zora had a large suitcase to retrieve. While waiting for the carousel to start, Griffin found himself gently rocking the stroller back and forth to keep the twins content. Amara gurgled and reached a tiny hand toward him. Instinctively, he extended a finger which she grasped with surprising strength. The simple trust in that baby's grip sent warmth flooding through him. He smiled down at her. "Hello there, little one," he cooed softly. Zora watched the exchange quietly. Seeing Griffin interact so sweetly with Amara both melted her heart and stung with bittersweet regret. She had once imagined a scene just like this. Griffin is a proud, doting father, and he was a natural, it seemed. They deserve to know him, she thought suddenly. He deserves to know them. The idea scared her, but it also felt right. Keeping the twins from him, from their father, no matter their complicated past, now felt wrong. But how to even begin that conversation? Soon, the carousel clanked and started turning. Griffin stepped forward without being asked, identifying Zora's suitcase. A purple one with a yellow ribbon tied to the handle, and heaving it off the belt. He handled the heavy bag with ease, setting it on the floor. "Got it," he said. Zora gave another grateful smile. "Thanks." She secured the suitcase's telescoping handle and balanced it while still holding the stroller. It was a lot to juggle. Griffin gently took the suitcase handle from her grasp. "Please let me." His tone was almost pleading. He needed to do something, anything to be useful to her right now. Perhaps to make up in small measure for the ways he hadn't been there before. She relented once more. "All right." There was a quiet tension between them as they began walking towards the exit and parking area. Neither knew quite what to say. There was so much to address, yet where to start. As they reached the curb outside, the warm Atlanta evening breeze hit them. It was that in-between hour where the sky was a deep blue, not yet dark. City lights twinkled in the distance. Zora hesitated, then spoke. "We were going to catch a taxi home." She had originally planned to haul the suitcase onto the MARTA train or take a cab, but now with Griffin here, Griffin shook his head immediately. "I have a car service waiting." Of course, he did. Even flying commercial, he'd had his assistant arrange a black SUV pickup. He pointed across the pickup lane where a chauffeur with a sign that read Harlow was idling by a Cadillac Escalade. "Ride with me," Griffin offered, meeting Zora's eyes earnestly. "Please, I'll drop you off at home. It's the least I can do." Zora hesitated. Her first instinct was to politely decline. She was used to doing things on her own, and she was wary of spending more time with Griffin than necessary. She was afraid of what feelings it might stir, but then she imagined trying to manage the twins and luggage in a regular taxi by herself inside. It would be much easier with his help and more comfortable for the babies. "All right," she agreed softly. "Thank you." Relief flickered across Griffin's face. He signaled to the driver, who promptly jogged over to assist. The driver, a polite middle-aged man, opened the SUV's back door. Griffin folded the stroller swiftly and handed it to the driver to stow in the trunk along with the suitcase. Zora climbed into the back seat first and began buckling the babies into the car's infant seats. She had requested them from the car service when she booked the flight. One does not travel with twins without planning. Once Amara and Dorian were secure and content, Zora slid to the middle seat between their car seats. Griffin got in beside Dorian, effectively boxing Zora between him and Amara's seat. The closeness in the confines of the SUV made her heart flutter nervously. Griffin's cologne, woody and familiar, mixed with the light baby powder scent that clung to her. It was an oddly comforting combination. As the car pulled away, city lights streaked by. Griffin gave the driver Zora's address in a quiet air-eyed. He didn't even ask her, just assumed he'd be taking her all the way home. Zora was mildly surprised he remembered her old neighborhood, but then realized her address was new to him. He must have intended to ask her, but she told him earlier she lived in Atlanta, not exactly where. She glanced at him. "How did you?" He rubbed the back of his neck, a telltale sign of slight embarrassment. "I might have peeked at your luggage tag when I grabbed your suitcase," he admitted. Indeed, her name and address were on the tag. He looked almost sheepish. "I'm sorry. I should have asked. I just didn't want to assume you'd let me take you home." Zora was half amused, half touched. It was unlike the confident Griffin she knew to be so unsure. "It's okay," she said. "I appreciate the ride," she paused, then added with a hint of teasing. "And the detective work." He chuckled softly, relieved she wasn't upset. The babies babbled quietly, watching the lights of Atlanta through their windows. For a few minutes, they drove in silence, listening to the soft jazz the driver had playing. The familiar landmarks of Atlanta passed by, the silhouette of downtown skyscrapers, the glow from the Ferris wheel at Centennial Park, the banners for the Atlanta Hawks near State Farm Arena. The city was alive and bustling, but inside the car, it felt like a delicate bubble of privacy. Griffin finally cleared his throat. This was his chance to talk away from the crowds. "Zora, about earlier on the plane," he began cautiously. "I wanted to say, I'm sorry if running into me made you uncomfortable." Zora looked at him surprised. "You don't have to apologize. It was a shock, yes, but not. It wasn't a bad thing." She managed a small smile. "I'm just as responsible for not saying anything. I was shocked, too. I mean, what were the odds?" He nodded, conceding that fate had certainly thrown them a curveball. Griffin took a breath, then spoke with more earnestness. "I also want to apologize for everything, for how things ended." His voice grew heavy. "I regret so much, Zora. The way I behaved. Zora held up a hand gently, blinking back sudden tears at his words. She hadn't expected an apology so soon, and not in a dark car with their children between them. It made her heart ache in a strange way. "Griffin, let's not do this here," she whispered, glancing at the driver, who tactfully kept his eyes on the road, and at the twins who, though babies, created a buffer of little ears, even if they couldn't understand. Griffin realized the setting wasn't ideal for a deeply personal conversation. He bit back the cascade of apologies that had been building in him for 2 years. "You're right. I'm sorry," he said softly. Then he chuckled without humor. "There I go, apologizing again." Zora gave a faint laugh. "It's all right." She noticed the way the city lights played across Griffin's face. He looked weary and vulnerable. This was a far cry from the brash, angry man she last saw during the divorce. Time had changed them both. They were approaching her neighborhood now, a quiet tree-lined street in a middle-class area. The SUV turned into the complex where Zora's townhouse was. It was a modest, cozy place she'd managed to buy last year, a far cry from the mansion she once shared with Griffin. But it was home. The car rolled to a stop in front of her unit. Before Zora could unbuckle, Griffin was already out on the sidewalk, helping the driver unload the stroller and suitcase. Then he opened the door on Zora's side. She stepped out carefully, stretching her legs, and went around to unzip the babies from their car seats. Griffin was there to take Dorian, lifting him out gently while Zora took Amara. The warm night air was filled with the sound of crickets. A neighbor's porch light illuminated the little group, now assembled in front of Zora's home. Zora fumbled for her keys, balancing Amara on her hip. Griffin quickly wheeled the suitcase to her door and waited. There was an awkward pause as they stood at the doorstep. Zora suddenly felt self-conscious. Her home was humble, a 2-bedroom townhouse she could afford with her salary as a graphic designer. Would Griffin judge her? It was silly. Why did she care what he thought of her place? Perhaps because once they'd shared a life of luxury, and now her life was very different. She unlocked the door and pushed it open. The interior lights were on low. She had them on an automatic timer. It was tidy, decorated warmly with family photos, some art, and importantly, all the telltale signs of babies. A playmat on the floor, a couple of stuffed animals on the couch, a high chair by the dining nook. Zora turned to Griffin, who still held Dorian. Would you like to come in for a minute?" she asked softly, surprising herself. Part of her felt it was only polite since he'd helped her so much. Another part wanted him to come in, if only to see a glimpse of this life he'd missed, or perhaps to continue the conversation they needed to have. Griffin looked both hopeful and hesitant. Only if you're okay with it, he said. I don't want to intrude, she assured. If it weren't for you, I'd still be struggling to get the suitcase out of the car. So, yes, come in and I think we should talk. The last part, she added in a more serious tone. Griffin nodded, heart thudding. This was it. They were finally going to address the elephant in the room. He stepped inside, carrying Dorian in with him. The driver had already departed, and the night was still outside as Zora closed the door behind them. Inside, Amara perked up at the sight of home and babbled happily. Zora set her down on the soft playmat. The toddler immediately grabbed a plush bunny and held it, wobbling on unsteady feet in that cute way 15-month-olds do. Dorian, now fully awake in Griffin's arms, patted Griffin's cheek curiously. Griffin let out a surprised laugh at the boy's bold familiarity. Hey there, little guy, he said, bouncing Dorian, which elicited a giggle. Zora watched the scene and couldn't help smile. It was surreal and heartwarming to see Griffin in her living room, effortlessly interacting with her children. Their children. She shook the thought away. Not yet. She needed to be sure before making any declarations. Have a seat, Zora said, gesturing to the couch. Griffin sat, Dorian still on his lap, and looked around. His eyes fell on a framed photo on a shelf. It was Zora holding the twins as newborns, all bundled in hospital blankets, a tired but radiant smile on her face. There was no father in that picture, just Zora and the babies. Griffin's heart constricted. Zora noticed his gaze linger on the photo. She took a deep breath. The time for evasion was over. She walked over and gently picked up the frame. She sat on the couch beside Griffin, keeping a respectful distance, and handed him the photo. That was the day they were born, she said quietly. My friend took it. Griffin studied the picture. The twins were so small in Zora's arms, her eyes puffy from tears of joy and exhaustion. She looked alone but determined. Griffin closed his eyes briefly, feeling the sting of tears. He should have been there holding her hand, sharing that moment. Zora, his voice broke. He forced himself to ask the question that had been burning inside him since he saw the twins. Are they mine? Zora's hands trembled slightly in her lap. She had imagined this conversation in her head countless times. Practiced it even. But now that it was happening, she felt unprepared. Honesty, she reminded herself. He deserves the truth. She met Griffin's gaze heated, eyes already glossy with tears. Yes, she whispered. They are yours, Griffin. Amara and Dorian, there are children. Though he had suspected. Hearing the confirmation outright sent Griffin reeling. A soft gasp escaped him. He looked down at Dorian, the little boy with soft fair curls, not unlike Griffin's own as a child, and he realized why the child looked familiar. He saw a bit of himself in that curious face. And Amara's eyes, those were Zora's eyes. They were his children. He was a father. I have a son and a daughter. Griffin's voice shook with emotion and wonder, as if saying it aloud made it real. Dorian chose that moment to squeal and reach for his mother. Zora gently took him from Griffin's lap and set him down next to Amara on the playmat. The twins gravitated to each other, babbling in their secret twin language as they played with blocks, blissfully unaware of the seismic shift happening in the adult's world. Zora turned back to Griffin, who still stared at the twins in astonishment. Why, he began, but his throat clenched. He tore his eyes from the children to look at her, pain and a hint of accusation in his expression. Why didn't you tell me? Tears spilled down Zora's cheeks now. She had expected his hurt and anger. She felt both justified in her choices and guilty at the same time. I found out I was pregnant a few weeks after I left, she explained softly. After that fight, I was such a mess, I didn't even notice I'd missed my period. She gave a sad half smile. I went to the doctor and they told me it was twins. I was shocked, scared. Griffin listened intently, his face stricken with remorse as each word sank in. Zora continued, voice trembling. I thought about calling you 100 times, but every time I picked up the phone, I remembered how we left things. The things we both said. She wiped her cheek. You said you weren't ready for kids, that you might never be. And at the time you were so angry. We both were. Griffin opened his mouth, but Zora held up her hand, wanting to finish. Then the papers were signed. And I didn't want to be the woman who trapped you or dragged you back out of obligation. I was prepared to do it alone. I had support from my mom and friends. I told myself it was best this way. She swallowed hard. But I wrote you a letter. A letter? Griffin echoed, surprised. She nodded, looking down at her hands. I poured everything into it. I told you about the pregnancy, how I felt, how sorry I was for everything, and how I wished things could have been different. A tear fell onto her hand. I mailed it to your New York office. I assumed you'd get it eventually, even if you didn't want to see me. Let me pause for one moment. If this part touched you, show your support by liking this video. And if you want stories filled with truth, love, and second chances, subscribe so you never miss one. Your support keeps these stories alive. Griffin's brow furrowed. He had never seen such a letter. I didn't receive any letter, he said slowly. Zora looked up, confusion on her face. I mailed it to Harlow Industries headquarters. Attention to you. This was a little over 2 years ago. You really never got it. Griffin shook his head, and a dark realization dawned on him. He muttered a curse under his breath. One mild enough not to count as strong language. My father, he said bitterly. He still had a stake in the company then, still monitored some of my correspondence. It's possible he might have intercepted it. Zora's eyes widened. Griffin's father, Richard Harlow, had never approved of their marriage. He wasn't outright cruel to Zora, but he was cold and dismissive, making it clear he thought she wasn't a suitable match for his son. A protective Black American woman from a middle-class family did not fit into the old money Harlow lineage, as far as Richard was concerned. He knew I left, Zora asked, voice hushed. Griffin nodded. I told him about the divorce after it was finalized. He was relieved, frankly. Griffin grimaced with shame, remembering how his father had patted him on the back for coming to his senses. If a letter came from you, he might have thought it best I never saw it. For my own good, in his twisted view, Zora shut her eyes, anger and disappointment welling. All this time she thought Griffin had ignored her letter, ignored her and the children, but if he never knew, she clenched her jaw. Your father always did think I was a distraction for you. Griffin reached out hesitantly and placed a hand over hers. I'm so sorry, he said, voice thick. If I'd known, I would have been there. In a heartbeat, Zora. You have to believe me. His eyes shone with tears now, too. The revelation clearly shaking him. Zora looked at their hands, his larger, paler hand gently covering her brown skin. The familiar warmth was still there. She believed him. In her heart, she did. Griffin had many flaws, but running from responsibility wasn't one of them. Not if he truly knew. If he'd read her letter, perhaps things would have been different. A silence fell, filled only by the soft sounds of the twins playing on the floor. Griffin took a shaky breath. I missed everything, he murmured, grief in his tone. Their birth, their first steps, maybe. I didn't even know I had them. He looked over at the babies, his children, and tears slipped down his cheeks now. I'm so sorry I wasn't there for you for them. Zora's heart broke at the sight of his tears. She rarely saw Griffin cry in the years she knew him. He always tried to be so controlled. She realized then that despite her pain, she never wanted this for him. She never wanted him to be robbed of knowing his children. She squeezed his hand. We can't change the past, she said softly. All we can do is figure out where to go from here. Griffin wiped his face with his free hand and nodded. I want to be in their lives, Zora, if you'll let me. I know I have no right to ask anything, but they're my kids, and his voice broke slightly as Dorian looked up at him from the floor with a toothy grin. I already love them so much. Zora felt a swell of emotion. She dreamed of this scenario sometimes. Griffin coming back, wanting to be a father to the twins, but she also feared it. Feared trusting him again. Feared that he might hurt them or her by leaving once more. They've only known me, she said, cautious. This will be a lot for them, for all of us. Griffin nodded vigorously. I understand. I'll go at whatever pace you say. If you want me to start as a friend of the family or something, I'll do that. I just don't want to vanish from them now that I know. His earnestness was palpable. Zora managed a watery smile. You could never just be a family friend, Griffin. They'll know you're their father. I won't hide that. Dorian already seems quite taken with you. She nodded toward the boy who was toddling over to Griffin's legs, placing a tiny hand on Griffin's knee for support as he balanced on chubby legs. It was as if he sensed this man belonged to him. Griffin's face lit up with amazement. He gently lifted Dorian onto his lap again. The toddler babbled something and patted Griffin's face. Griffin chuckled, eyes shining. He has your energy, he said softly. And she? He looked at Amara, who was now sucking her thumb contentedly. She looks like you too, but I think she might have my eyes. They're a bit greenish-brown. Zora peered at her daughter. It was true. Amara's eyes were a lighter hazel, whereas Zora's were dark brown. She nodded, laughing quietly. Yes, I suppose she does. A comfortable quiet fell as they both absorbed this new reality. Griffin was a father. Zora saw him gently bouncing Dorian and realized that old anger she had harbored. The resentment at his absence was slowly ebbing, replaced by a cautious hope. He hadn't knowingly abandoned them. Fate and interference had kept him in the dark. Still, there were wounds that needed healing. "Griffin," Zora said softly, drawing his attention, "I need to know something. If you had truly known I was pregnant, would it have made a difference? Would you have wanted to try again with me or just for the kids?" It was a vulnerable question, one that had plagued her whenever she considered contacting him after the twins were born. She feared being rejected, him taking the children, but not wanting her. Griffin set Dorian back on the floor with a soft pat, then turned to face Zora fully. The intensity in his gray eyes made her heart skip. "Zora, I would have moved heaven and earth to be with you again if I had known," he said solemnly. "Not just because of the babies, though that would have been huge, but because losing you was the biggest mistake of my life." Zora's breath caught. She searched his face. He seemed entirely sincere, voice trembling with emotion. He continued, "After you left, I was a wreck. I might have pretended to the world I was fine, but I was broken. I threw myself into work because I couldn't face coming home to an empty house. I kept thinking about everything I did wrong, how I didn't fight for you." He ran a hand through his hair. "If I'd known you were carrying our children, I never would have let you go alone. I would have come begging you to take me back to let me fix things." Zora felt tears on her face again. This time they were tears of relief, of release. Hearing that didn't magically mend all their issues, but it soothed a deep wound in her heart, the worry that he hadn't cared. She wiped her tears, smiling a little. "You really hurt me," she whispered, voicing the hurt. "Frankly, back then you broke my heart." Griffin's eyes filled anew with remorse. "I know, and I've regretted it every day since. I can't change what I did, Zora. But I want to spend however long it takes making it up to you, to all of you." He glanced lovingly at the twins. The raw sincerity in his voice, combined with the day's extraordinary events, overwhelmed Zora. This was the man she had loved so deeply. He was here, offering his heart again. But could she trust it? Trust him? The scars of their past weren't gone, but seeing him with the twins, hearing his earnest words, it ignited hope. Zora took a deep breath. "I'm willing to try," she said softly. "For the twins and for us. But I'll need time to rebuild trust, Griffin." "We both will," he nodded immediately, a flicker of joy lighting up his face as he realized she was open to reconciliation. "Of course, whatever it takes. I'll prove myself to you, Zora." I swear a small laugh escaped her lips. "You might have to prove yourself to my mother, too," she teased lightly. "She was not happy with you, to put it mildly." Griffin winced playfully. "That's fair. I probably deserve worse from her." He remembered how Zora's mother had always been kind, but wary of him. After the divorce, he doubted she had any love left for him. "I'm prepared to grovel," he added with a half-smile. Zora laughed gently, a musical sound that Griffin realized he hadn't heard in so long. It made his heart soar to hear it again. Amara, hearing her mother laugh, giggled too, though she didn't know why, which made Zora and Griffin laugh even more. Soon, Dorian was clapping because everyone else was happy. The living room, which had seen only Zora's quiet struggles for so long, now filled with a warmth and joy that had been absent. That night marked a new beginning. Griffin stayed a while longer, helping put the twins to bed when they grew fussy. Zora was surprised at how quickly the babies took to him. Dorian refused to settle until Griffin rocked him gently while humming a soft tune. Zora watched from the doorway of the nursery, heart swelling as Griffin cradled their son with such care. It was intimate in a way that transcended the physical closeness. It was an intimacy of family, of shared love for their children. After the twins were asleep, Zora walked Griffin to the door. They both lingered, reluctant to part despite the late hour. The Atlanta night was peaceful outside, cicadas chirping in the warm air. Griffin turned to her on the threshold. "I meant what I said. I'll do whatever it takes to rebuild this." "To rebuild us," he murmured. Zora looked up at him, illuminated by the porch light. She saw the man she fell in love with, the gentle determination in his eyes, the genuine warmth. Not the cold, distant workaholic he'd become during their rough patch, but the real Griffin who had given her spontaneous roses and sung off key karaoke with her on a road trip, who had nursed her through the flu and remembered every tiny detail about her likes and dislikes. That man was still in there, now tempered by a bit more humility and a lot more longing. "I believe you," she said softly. "We'll take it one day at a time." He nodded, relief and happiness evident. A charged silence fell. This close, Zora felt the old magnetic pull between them. She noticed a tiny scar on his chin she'd almost forgotten, and how his gaze flickered to her lips, then back to her eyes. Griffin's voice was husky when he spoke. "May the 1st, he paused, swallowing. May the first give you a hug. Just I've missed you so much. Zora's heart skipped. It was such a simple request, yet profound for them. In answer, she closed the distance and wrapped her arms around him. Griffin let out a breath he'd been holding and enfolded her gently against his chest. They held each other in a warm embrace beneath the Georgia night sky. It started as a tentative hug, but years of pent-up emotions soon flowed. Zora buried her face against his shoulder, inhaling the familiar scent of him, and a tear of gratitude escaped her eyes. Griffin stroked her back soothingly, as if afraid she might break. "I've missed you," she whispered, admitting it fully at last. "So much." Griffin tightened his embrace, voice barely audible. "You have no idea how much I've missed you too, Zora." They stayed like that for what felt like ages, healing a little more with each second in each other's arms. When they finally pulled back slightly, their faces were inches apart. Griffin hesitated, searching her face for permission for any sign. Zora felt her pulse quicken. In that charged moment, all the lonely nights, the regrets, the love they never lost, it all converged. She tilted her chin up and closed the gap, pressing her lips to his in a gentle, heartfelt kiss. Griffin responded immediately, a soft exhale of relief escaping through his nose as he kissed her back tenderly. It wasn't a fiery, passionate kiss of new lovers. It was sweeter, deeper, a kiss of homecoming, of forgiveness, of love that had weathered storms and survived. Zora's hands rested on his chest, feeling his heart pounding as hard as hers. Griffin cupped her face gently as if she were made of porcelain. For that brief kiss, time seemed to stop. Both of them reveled in the familiarity and the newness all at once. They'd kissed 1,000 times before in their marriage, but this was their first kiss as true. Equals with painful lessons learned, and a newfound appreciation for what they almost lost. When they slowly parted, Zora looked down shyly, a smile playing on her lips. Griffin pressed his forehead to hers, eyes closed, smiling too. "It felt right. I should go," he finally whispered, though every fiber in him wanted to stay. "It's late," Zora nodded. "You have that business meeting," she recalled, then realized the meeting was probably hours ago during their flight or right after landing. "Oh, did you miss it?" she asked. Griffin chuckled softly. "It's all right. It was just a dinner with some investors. I rescheduled." He didn't mention that he texted his assistant from the car earlier to cancel all commitments for the next day or two. At that time, he was focused on sorting things out with Zora, and nothing was more important. Deals could wait. Zora arched an eyebrow. The old Griffin would never blow off investors for personal reasons. That he did so now spoke volumes. She felt a warmth bloom in her chest. Perhaps he truly had changed his priorities. "Then I'll see you tomorrow," she asked, hopeful and a bit shy, as if they were making their first date. Griffin smiled broadly. "Absolutely. If that's okay, I can come by and we'll figure out, a schedule or what you'd like me to do. Maybe I can take you all to breakfast, or I can watch the twins if you need a break." He was eager, maybe overly so, and it was endearing. Zora laughed lightly. "Breakfast sounds nice. They usually wake up by 7. "I'll be here at 7 with food then," he promised, and then added with a playful wheeze, "though I'll have to relearn how to function at 6 a.m. "I've been on a bachelor schedule," she smirked, teasing. "Better get used to it, Dad." The word Dad hung in the air, full of meaning. Griffin looked almost startled at first. Then he broke into a grin. "I like the sound of that," he said quietly, as if cherishing the title. He reached out and squeezed Zora's hand one more time. "Good night, Zora." "Good night, Griffin." He walked down the porch steps, throwing one last glance back at her, illuminated in the doorway. Both of them felt a surge of gratitude for second chances, for the twists of fate that brought them together this day. Zora watched as he got into a ride-share car he must have called and finally drove off. She touched her lips gently, still feeling the tingle of their kiss. Life certainly had a way of surprising you when you least expected it. She closed her door and leaned against it, saying a silent prayer of thanks that this unexpected reunion had turned into a blessing. Upstairs, one of the twins gave a small cry. Either Amara or Dorian. Motherly duty called. Zora headed up to soothe her baby, heart full and hopeful for what tomorrow would bring. The next morning, 7:05 a.m., true to his word, Griffin was at Zora's door bright and early, balancing a tray of coffees and a bag of pastries, looking a mix of nervous and excited. Zora greeted him with a warm smile. Her hair was still in a loose wrap, and she wore comfy loungewear, still beautiful to him, in a natural homey way he'd missed terribly. The twins were already up, one bouncing in a play pen and the other in a high chair, nibbling cereal puffs. The moment Dorian spotted Griffin, he burst into a big grin and reached out with both arms, nearly toppling over the playpen rail. Da-da-da, he babbled. Griffin froze, eyes wide. He looked at Zora for confirmation, hardly daring to believe what he heard. Zora's eyes were equally round in astonishment. Did he just? She stuttered. Dorian continued his excited chant, little fists opening and closing. Duh! A lump formed in Griffin's throat. He set the coffee and food down hastily on a side table and approached the playpen, lifting the eager boy into his arms. I'm here, buddy. Daddy's here, he whispered, voice choked with emotion. Zora covered her mouth, tears welling as she watched Dorian recognize his father for the first time in words. It was as if the little one just knew. Amara in her high chair started clapping at the excitement, not fully understanding, but happy nonetheless. In that sunlit living room, with the smell of fresh coffee and the sound of children's laughter, Griffin and Zora shared a look of pure joy. Their road ahead would require patience, forgiveness, and effort. But they were ready. Together, they would craft a new story for their family, one built on love, honesty, and the hard lessons learned from past mistakes. As they sat down to breakfast, Griffin spoon-feeding yogurt to Amara while Zora sipped coffee and laughed. When Dorian tried to steal his dad's croissant, it was clear that this little family was finally healing. The billionaire had learned that wealth and pride meant nothing without the people you love. And Zora learned that sometimes hearts can find their way back to each other when given a chance. Their story had all the elements of a poignant tale, a blend of emotional drama and light romance. A chance encounter on a plane, shocking secrets revealed, and ultimately a beautiful reunion. It was a story of surprise twists of fate, second chances, and the unbreakable bonds of family. They would share this story one day with Amara and Dorian. How their mommy and daddy found their way back to love on an airplane to Atlanta. How forgiveness and love triumphed over anger and loss. It would be a story with a simple but powerful message. True love is worth fighting for. And it's never too late to fix mistakes and start anew. In the end, Griffin and Zora's story is a heartwarming reminder that love, when nurtured with understanding and forgiveness, can overcome the darkest of times. Their unexpected meeting on that plane was the twist of fate they needed to start writing a new chapter. One filled with hope, love, and the laughter of their children for years to come. Thank you for staying to the end. If this story moved you, give it a like and share your thoughts in the comments. I would love to hear your own lessons about love, forgiveness, and family. Make sure you subscribe so you never miss the next story. I'll see you in the next one.